Good evening. I'm Nadine Daniel. I'm the National Refugee Welcome Coordinator of the Church of England. The most important word in that rather cumbersome title is the word welcome, because we're not very good at it at the moment, in case you hadn't noticed. It's a new post. It took the Church of England until the middle of 2017 to work out that they didn't actually have anybody working on refugee and asylum issues, and yet anyone who works with refugee and asylum seekers will know that it's the faith-based organisations who have leapt into the yawning chasm that the hostile environment has left behind. And I wanted to actually title this The Language of Othering, or How to Make Social Justice Issues Taboo. And othering has been going on forever. It's the oldest trick in the politician's toolbox, but the consequences of it can be devastating. You only have to look in the Bible, the children of Israel good, Egyptians bad, Egyptians get hit by plague, and that's basic othering. But these days, in these days of multiple social media platforms, it snowballs, and very, very quickly. So if I give you an example of what I'm trying to say here is, in the 1920s, if anybody had said there was going to be a Holocaust of the Jewish race in Western Europe, every politician would have put their money on it coming in France. And the anti-Semitism that was rabid in France in the early first 2 decades of the 20th century moved quite quickly. So the Holocaust actually happened in Germany, but the anti-Semitism kept travelling east. But it took 10 years, 10 or 15 years for that mindset of the Jew as the other, as the enemy. Because the rule in politics is you always need an enemy, someone to kick against. And if you haven't got someone to kick against, what you do is you create it by othering somebody. Well, the others of the 21st century are the refugees and the migrants. And you kind of expect it from certain aspects of media, the Fox Newses, the Daily Mail, that sort of thing. What you don't expect, or I don't because I'm old-fashioned, is it to come from the BBC. And yet the BBC have a statement on their website. I need to find this and read it out because I have called it terminological inexactitude. So in order to argue that it is, I need to read it out word for word for you. So give me a second. Here we go. The statement on the BBC News website, which they put at the back of any news item about refugees and asylum seekers, goes like this. A note on terminology. The BBC uses the term migrant to refer to all people on the move who have yet to complete the legal process of claiming asylum. This group includes people fleeing war-torn countries who are likely to be granted refugee status, as well as people who are seeking jobs and better lives who the government are likely to rule are economic migrants. Discuss. Because the truth is, the people who are getting into boats in the Mediterranean tonight, fleeing from Libya in the hope of finding land, they're not really coming looking for jobs. But they may not be coming from war-torn countries either. And the UN Convention on Refugees in 1951, written by us guys, albeit that it's Eurocentric because it was designed to deal with what was then the greatest crisis of human forced displacement, which was what happened after the Second World War. So you had 10.8 million people moving through Europe. So it is somewhat Eurocentric, but it gives you a whole list of things that are reasons why you can genuinely claim asylum. Any of us can claim asylum. And asylum isn't an other people over there in Africa in mud huts. Even the UNHCR, I was looking at a video they put out yesterday, and it opens with people living in your typical African village with huts. And bolted together bicycles. And you think, actually, most refugees are not like that, and that's not where they've come from. But yes, war is an issue, but it's not the only reason people claim asylum. People's sexuality, coming from countries where being gay is a capital offence or an imprisonable offence, that is a reason to claim asylum. People whose faith doesn't match. So one of the reasons so many Iranians are coming is Christianity, bizarrely, is the fastest growing faith in Iran. And it's fine to be a Christian in Iran, as long as you're born one. Because people forget that Iran is actually a pluralist state. There are still Jews living in Iran, up near the Caspian Sea. But that's why they run, and that's a valid reason to claim asylum. Iran is the 25th richest country in the world. It's also the 4th largest receiver of refugees from Afghanistan and Pakistan. But it's the 7th largest exporter of refugees to other countries. In 1597, part of my job, I spent quite a bit of time in Canterbury. In 1597, the Dean and Chapter of Canterbury Cathedral, recognising the large number of French refugees on their doorstep, offered them the use of a chapel in Canterbury Cathedral. And if you go to Canterbury Cathedral at 3 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon, you will still find the French community in Kent, Protestant community in Kent, using that chapel. So that's what refugee welcome looks like. That's what faith-based organisations have always done. But that was the people of Canterbury saying, these people have moved here seeking refuge, Protestants seeking refuge from the French government. So that little English channel, it's not beyond the bounds of possibility that some of us might be wanting to seek refuge the other side of the channel soon. And we would have that right. And how would we want to be treated? Would we want to be called a refugee? Or would we want to be called a migrant? Because that little word has become very powerful. It's just an ordinary word. A migrant is somebody who chooses to move from point A to point B to have a better life. A refugee is somebody who's quite happy living where they are, thank you very much, but they can't live there anymore. For one reason or another. They have to flee. So, an example is from a faith-based organisation. Mary and Joseph were migrants when they moved from Nazareth to Bethlehem in order to comply with the census rules. They were looking for a better life by becoming part of the Roman Empire. But when Herod decided that killing little boys was a good idea, they fled to Egypt and waited there until he had died. And that is the reason why most refugees from Syria are actually living on the borders of Syria, because they want to go back. Migrant. Are they migrant, those people in tents? They've moved, but did they want to? No. And what is happening throughout Europe, through the use of social media, is that othering is becoming very quickly very potent. So when Viktor Orban, who is the Prime Minister of Hungary, said, "We are a Christian country, these migrants are not welcome here because they are not like us," that was the most appalling oxymoron any Christian could ever utter. For a Christian not to offer welcome to the stranger is the most unchristian thing you could do. And throughout all the faith-based organisations, whether you're Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Sikh, Hindu, they all have that same mantra of welcoming the stranger, caring for the poor, caring for the needy. And suddenly that is being challenged as not being the right thing to do. Our government is spending millions of pounds paying Libyan warlords to keep those migrants in Libya. Now that is a breach of the UN Convention. That's a breach of the Geneva Protocols, but we're doing it. We're paying Turkey to do the same, and Turkey is refouling by pushing people of Kurdish origin back into Syria because they don't want them in Turkey. And this isn't me giving you some joke. I know someone personally that has happened to. So in 2015, when Alan Kurdi died, when the schools went back in September, my phone started ringing with panic-stricken head teachers saying, suddenly they're using the word migrant as a term of abuse. Children are being beaten up in the playground because they're a migrant. And we don't understand, they're asking us questions. The children aren't doing the bullying, they're asking us questions about what these migrants are. And are they taking up our school places? And is that the reason my little brother has to go to a different school? And so I spent a lot of time going into schools trying to answer these questions, and it was always the same questions. So we wrote a booklet about it and called it Welcoming the Stranger, which went viral. We published 20,000 copies, then we published another 60,000 copies. Then we thought, oh well, we'll just put it available online, and it's been downloaded all over the world. And it's just a simple little booklet telling people how to welcome a stranger. But we got an awful lot of flack for doing it. Why are you paying people to encourage these migrants? Because if you call somebody, put a label on somebody, they're not human, you are dehumanizing them. So Viktor Orban got away with saying, and indeed nobody really criticised him for saying, we are a Christian country, these migrants are not welcome. And in September, Salvini, who is the Interior Minister, basically the Prime Minister of Italy at the moment, said he was going to round up all the Roma in Italy, he was going to document them, draw up a list, and if they weren't Italian citizens, he was going to deport them. And my blood went cold, and it went cold for two reasons. One, because I like history and I was thinking backwards, and the other was because it disappeared from the BBC website almost as soon as it came up. When I went back 10 minutes later, it had gone. Yesterday's news. We used to say in Liverpool, yesterday's fish and chips. You know, yesterday's news is today's fish and chip. But it was 10 minutes later it had gone. I had to really search until I finally found out on the Italian website. It wasn't really news that the Interior Minister of Italy was really suggesting that he was going to round up the Roma and deport them. Well, the last Sunday in January is Holocaust Memorial Day, and we rightly remember the Holocaust. What we sometimes tend to forget is alongside the Jews in those gas chambers were the gays, were the liberals, the union organisers, and 1.3 million Romas. And that's why I'm actually quite scared at this othering and this fake newsing, because it is running so fast that it is getting increasingly difficult for people that work and are active in supporting people, other members of the human race that have sought refuge here because they are asking us to help. That's what they say, they're asking us to help. And do you know what the big news is? They can help us. But we're not seeing that. 38.2% of refugees are educated to tertiary level and above. 60% of them are underemployed. That 38.6% is actually 7% higher than the average of resident Europeans. So in other words, refugees are educated to a higher standard on average than Europeans are. And yet, we underemploy them. I was talking to a young lady who was giving a presentation in Chester 3 weeks ago. She has an English degree. She's worked in the aviation industry for 10 years in Syria. She went to the job centre and they said, "Oh, you look pretty. Would you like to do a course in hairdressing and be a beautician?" They didn't even look to see what to validate her degree. They didn't even look to do anything for her. So, folks, I'm saying to you, we need to stop the othering. We need to stop calling people migrants. We actually need to stop calling them refugees and just start calling them by their name and welcoming them as people like us. Thank you.